Hi everyone, welcome to today's session. This is Ramanuj from LawSikho. With me I have Parveen. So a much awaited webinar today. We are going to talk about how companies are handling the COVID crisis. Coronavirus caused a total lockdown in India, and of course it is impacting businesses in a big way. And we have a lot of people with us today who are curious about what is happening. I can see there are many advocates with us, some law students, and of course there will be in-house counsels also. Before we begin, if you can all just introduce yourself in the chat. Here is the chat. So if you can just quickly introduce who's there in the session today and what you do in brief, so it will help us to understand your background and perhaps provide more value during the webinar, and we can you know address your queries also very soon. So keep posting your questions in the chat as well. So please share your background as to, are you a lawyer, are you a law student, are you an in-house counsel, are you advising private clients, are you working in a law firm? Please share the details. It would be great to know that and also to answer your queries. Okay, so now we will straight jump into today's discussion. So, Parveen, why don't you, to start with, if you can introduce yourself? Yeah, of course, I mean, we have shared a brief details about you while we invited people to the webinar. But still, if you can share your career journey and what you do in your own words, it would be great.
Sure. So thank you so much for this, and thank you all for taking the time out and joining this webinar. My name is Parveen Mahtani. I head legal and compliance for Tata Realty and Infrastructure and Tata Housing. Just before I start, is the speed all right for you all, and are you all able to hear me clearly?
Yes, you are clearly audible, at least on my side. Those who can hear Parveen clearly, why don't you type on the chat yes, that you can just type yes, and we'll know we can clearly.
Great, that's a lot of yes. That's wonderful. I can see there are a lot of law firms. There's also corporates, in-house counsels. So great to have a mix and from different states. So I think some are from different countries also. So this should be great. All right. So just to give you a profile of what is it that we will cover, Tata Housing and Tata Realty and Infrastructure has projects in most states in India. So this has been an interesting time for us when the lockdown has happened, because we've had to implement everything in multiple states. So barring only a few states, we're practically there in every other state, and we've had to really follow each of the circulars that are applicable, not just the center, but at each state level, so that we can take care of the issues. So apart from the human suffering, which is really, really sad, I think it was an absolutely unprecedented, extraordinary circumstance that nobody really foresaw that it would have this level of magnitude of an issue. While it has been happening in China since January, I think a lot of us did not realize when, especially we made our business plans for the next financial year. We were all due for our board meetings in March itself, and all the business plans have changed. So to start with, I'd say let's look at, I read a very interesting McKinsey report and spoke about how we have to now deal with the 5 R's. And I'll run you through this. The first R is resolve. We had to address the immediate challenges. So before the lockdown was announced, and we were just asked to be careful about the sanitizers and all in the office, what was good is that the HR department implemented a self-declaration form. It was a very simple, basic form through SurveyMonkey. Fill in whether you have traveled in the last 14 days or been in contact with people from a certain number of countries in the last 14 days. Any family member has traveled. That was also required to be specified. Basically, basic parameters. They looked into who needs to self-quarantine. For example, one of the persons in my own department, his wife was returning back from Germany. She was with TCS, and he had to go on self-quarantine for that period because he had just come back from Germany, given the situation was more advanced there prior to our lockdown situation. So these were the early measures that the company implemented. Uh, then thereafter, once the lockdown did get implemented, we had to huddle back as senior leadership and discuss what is the immediate direction that we are going to give. This becomes critical because when you are physically in the office, it's very easy to give guidance to monitor. But when you suddenly put that many workforce on work from home, it is very important that you give them a structured routine, a task to do, in a manner to monitor productivity. At the same time, it is very, very important that the leadership speaks of the trust and the transparency to ensure that the workers are motivated enough to really work at home, given that in India, a lot of people we understand may not have the privacy required in the house to be able to work in an isolated manner, concentrate, quiet, or have conference calls. A lot of people probably do not have IT facilities. So I think the first important requirement has been for the IT department to really scale up. The first initial days, we had to allow people to come into the office because a lot of data was on the servers. This did raise a lot of issues on data privacy, data security, and we had to ensure that the data that is being taken is good enough for the teams to be able to work on their own laptop. We also had to migrate to Microsoft Teams. While we were using this initially, it wasn't extensive because there were a lot of physical meetings that were taking place. Now, Microsoft Teams, if any of you have used it, works wonderfully to coordinate whether intra-department, inter-department, to organize a lot of things. You can upload files, have agendas, you can record meetings. It is a fantastic tool, and this was implemented with great speed. So one R that we spoke about was about the resolve, where we resolve to address the immediate challenges and look at that. The second would be resilience. Second R is really, really important because you have to first identify the risks that we face as a business. The example that we're in is real estate and infrastructure, and we have to identify what are the immediate risks. Let's explain this in detail. If, for example, you have the customers who booked houses, is the sound disturbing? Somebody said that. Yes. So we have to identify the key risks. Now, this is important. Every corporate must identify what are the risks to its business, whether short term, long term, and these could be from many angles. Firstly, it could be from your supply chain if you're dependent on different companies, different countries to supply materials. Then you're going to have to relook at your entire supply chain mechanics. The second will be your vendors, your suppliers, your construction workers. All of them have migrated back to their towns, villages. This has caused a lot of demobilization at the site. Of course, today the Haryana government has passed a circular where it has asked companies to ensure that the construction workers are provided accommodation, basic facilities. This has been just passed today, this evening. So that's only for Haryana, yet I assume it's going to be passed across different states, and now corporates are going to have to bear the cost of providing accommodation. The circular even says preferably at the site itself, and not just for the workers, but for their families too, so that they do not have to go back to the families. Yes, so I have received a question which is asking about whether any advice to be given on whether vendors are to be paid when performance has been yes, this requires a detailed discussion. This is relating to force majeure. So the first circular that was issued way back in February was this event is to be treated as a force majeure because it is a natural disaster. It is declared as a pandemic. But this purely really depends on the terms of your contract. If you have a FIDIC contract or you have different kinds of contract, you really have to see whether there is any, this is going to lead to a termination of a contract. Will it lead to only an extension of time or merely a suspension of this? Will it entitle the contractor to additional charges because there's an extension of time? Or then are you going into the realm of it being a frustration of contract under the Indian Contract Act? You also have to see whether your contract really provides for force majeure as an event at all. At times, a lot of force contracts define force majeure simpliciter as acts of God, and then yes, this would be part of it. Certain other contracts have defined specified events as acts of God. Yes, something like this is going to really rewrite how force majeure as a clause itself is drafted in future contracts, because these kind of epidemics, etc., were seen way back only when we had the plague, when really didn't, we weren't there at that time. But thereafter, it's going to make a lot of difference. Yes, if force majeure, if there is a force majeure event, it will not be a frustration. It's a completely different point. So let's come back to the 5 R's. The first, let me just sum it up for you. Firstly, it's resolve. Second is resilience. The third is return. Fourth is reimagination. And 5 is reform. So I just run you through these first and then get into the detailed context of what is really happening in the lockdown and how the circulars have enacted certain issues and clarified certain issues. We discussed resolve, which is to address immediate challenges. The second is resilience, where you identify the risks. You have to look at your near-term cash management flow, the issues that you're going to have with your cash management. It's also advised to conduct a kind of a stress testing of your financials and build a resilience dashboard to now really monitor for the first financial year, what's really going to happen once we start in April and we're beginning a new financial year. So all authorities have granted extension either for filing of returns up to 15th April or 30th April, when including for Provident Fund or ESI benefits. All these extensions have been granted. Even RBI today has issued the circular for a moratorium where you request the bank for moratorium, whether for the term loan and then for the working capital, and there are guidelines specified to that. So after resolve and
Parveen, just to confirm this is Ramanuj. Just to confirm, is are business loans also covered by this moratorium, or is it only for personal loans?
Personal term loans and working capital loans also. So this does not include credit card payments because that is a revolving credit. So anything which is a revolving credit has been excluded. If there are certain further clarifications that are required, I'm sure they will issue a subsequent circular. But the detailed reading of the circular. Okay. The third is return. The next is return, which we have to plan the business back to scale. So how are we going to return back to the business once we really this? Now, this is going to be interesting because while we have only a 21-day lockdown currently presented, there are also a lot of reports on how the graph is going to go higher. Whether that's true or not, let government really clarify the details of that. But with Australia and UK and certain parts going into a longer lockdown period, what really needs to be seen is how you're going to operate business from a work from home environment. The next R would be reimagination. We have to now see what is the next normal. We're going to have to reinvent ourselves on how we do business, the physical meetings, online transactions that really need to take place. I think a lot of amendments in the IT Act would be required because of digital signature, digital online payment facilities, payment gateways. There's expected to be a lot of reform and regulation relating to that, which brings me to the last R, which is reform. We really need to see all of this is going to cause a lot of regulatory impact. What circulars we're really seeing now relate to current measures and immediate necessities, essential supplies being looked at. But now we will see a lot of other regulations which will come into play to ensure business continuity for other industries and ensure that the economy continues to run. So that's what the 5 R's are about. I pause here for a second if you want to ask me any questions or put it on a chat before we get into segments of how companies deal with it.
All right, sure. So, I have a couple of questions, and thank you so much for giving this amazing, brief background as to what's going on. There are some hard questions. There are a lot of businesses which are finding it hard to stay afloat. Like there are a lot of businesses who's immediately been cut off from their revenue sources. For example, in hospitality, airlines, there are a lot of businesses which are facing tremendous hardship on that account. There are many businesses with a lot of recurring costs, which is very high recurring cost, and they are struggling. They don't have at the same time any kind of revenue streams to match those costs. So in those circumstances, what do you see is going to happen? Of course, it's very hard for you to predict also, I'm sure. Being a seasoned professional, can you think of some ways in which it may go from here in terms of businesses which are not cash positive and maybe running out of funds very quickly? What are the options they have? And if they do not have any possibility of quickly reopening also, there are many businesses which are not going to be able to come back to business very quickly and will need additional capital to restart the whole system. So in that circumstances, what are your observations?
Yes, so this I think is yet to be seen as to how the government will deal with it. I would not want to comment on that realm, given that there are a lot of restrictions on saying on issues which could create a panic. They're under the Disaster Management Act or the Epidemic Act. They have essentially now looked at immediately ensuring that people who are at the wage level, the building construction workers, those circulars have been passed to ensure that they have either shelter or immediate access to funds. They've looked at basic essentials about their pulses and grain and rice, those facilities. Now I think the next they would really be concentrating on how small business owners are going to operate if they're not allowed to open their stores, which are not dealing in essential commodities. That is yet to be seen. There is a lot of lobbying going on where I believe a lot of business owners have probably written and are lobbying to the government to and are seeking questions and clarifications on how they're going to earn their livelihood because they do not fall in the category of wages, construction workers, domestic servants, that category. They're not in essential services, but it is not going to be possible for them to sustain for that many months without restarting and reopening their businesses. So whether the government is considering any kind of fund or any kind of relaxations and subsequent exemptions is yet to be seen.
So if you can just give any idea about, let's say somebody is an in-house counsel in a company which is under distress right now, or in those one of those categories where they're really struggling with funds. So what would be the job of the in-house counsel in that circumstances? What would they be their role? What role they are playing in that circumstance?
So I think the role of the in-house counsel is only to provide legal advice basis what are the legal notifications that are issued by the government and the present laws which are in hand. If a particular business is impacted, the legal counsel could probably look at approaching the appropriate forum, which could take it to the government, or if no such forum really exists, then probably writing as a company directly to the government. They could explore that possibility, providing economic condition as to what issue they're really facing, how they're really impacted, and what reliefs they're really seeking. So there are reports, if you read by CII or FICCI, and these kind of remedial measures have been recommended. In fact, FICCI has a report, if you Google and look at it, where it has given suggestions industry-wise. And this runs across all industries, where what issues they foresee and what is it that they have suggested. It's an interesting report.
Okay. In many cases, businesses are finding that they have, while they have no funds, they also have many contracts under which they have to either perform. Maybe they are not in a position to perform those contracts, or they are not in a position to take delivery when the other party is ready to perform. In some cases, so how are the in-house counsels dealing with this? I'm guessing that they would have to go through the contracts and assess the risks that the company is maybe exposed to, and at least find some ways to either renegotiate or give notices for anticipatory breach of contract, etc. So what can a lawyer do in these circumstances for their companies or their clients to contain the situation, or what would be the certain measures that you can take which would later be in the court or in arbitration will be considered to be a prudential measure that you have taken and informed the other side within time, etc. So do you see any of such work coming to lawyers, or they needing to do such tasks, if you have any?
It is an interesting time. There's a lot of work, if you ask me, whether for an in-house counsel or even lawyers with law firms. The entire realm is going to be on this force majeure situation of frustration of contract. It is extraordinary circumstance where you cannot deliver goods, or you're not able to perform your services. So each of this is going to require specific legal advice with solutions that could be provided. Now, this could be either by extension of time, by mutual extension between parties, or are you pleading frustration where you do not wish to continue performing the service because it is not going to be possible in the near term to do that. It could mean that there's a cost implication, and you need to renegotiate the contract. All of it is going to require specific interpretation and analysis of the contracts before you really advise either your company or your client on how to deal with the issue, as well as not just what the issue is. I think what's going to be relevant is what is the solution that you're really recommending for them on how to deal with that issue.
Okay, and if you can throw some light on how once these lockdowns are lifted and courts open, do you see like companies getting hit with a lot of litigation? Of course, people will try mediation and negotiation, renegotiation of contracts and all of that. But do you expect like a wave of litigation later on?
See, we have to also understand that litigation is expensive. So the economy, in the condition that it is, corporates are already going to be having a tough time. A lot of sectors are deeply impacted more than others. So to run a litigation will really depend on the magnitude of the issue, as well as are you seeking termination of contract, frustration and avoidance of performance of services? Are you seeking damages? Also the context of where you're really seeking damages, whether it's damages in India, because it's interpreted and the quantum of damages is a very different concept in India to vis-a-vis that concept of damages globally. So a lot of it will really depend on that. I think what's expected more probably is a lot of renegotiation of contracts to ensure that there's business continuity, completion of work orders, projects, all of that taking place. Yes, that's where primarily it would be. You could be even renegotiating your loans with your banks again, given the recent RBI circular on the moratorium period, etc., applying once you request the bank, and that will not be treated as an asset downgrade, classification downgrade. I have some specific comment on the chat. Once you're done, then I can run through and respond to each of the queries that people are raising.
Sure. Go ahead. Maybe you can start answering the questions. Yes, please go ahead.
Sure.
Would you like to pick the questions?
Yes.
Hi.
Go ahead.
My question is this: now the doctrine of frustration kicks in, but if this clause is missing in the contract, then
So the doctrine of frustration is provided under the Indian Contract Act, and even if it is not specified in your contract, it's always the law which overrides contract, and then you'll have to read it in conjunction with that.
that is true. But if it goes in arbitration, then would it follow also?
I think what you mean is that what if force majeure is not mentioned in the contract?
No.
Is that what you mean?
There is a difference between force majeure and doctrine of frustration, I suppose.
Okay.
But what do you write in about doctrine of frustration in your contract?
Normally, writing contract force majeure clause, I suppose.
So nobody writes doctrine of frustration in the contract, do they? Like what would you write? I'm not sure. Please enlighten me.
That is what I am specifying, that we all write force majeure clause, and doctrine of frustration is never mentioned in the contract. In the courts, we can duly mention there as per Indian Contract Act. Will it be relevant in arbitration proceedings also?
Yes, the procedure is the same. Whether you go by resolve your dispute by way of arbitration or court, it is a matter of how you have drafted the dispute resolution clause. But the principles of law, whether you're on court or in arbitration, it is the same Indian Contract Act, and it will be the same frustration which you will have to plead and prove. So it is only the procedure that you're following, and you've made a choice whether you want to go into arbitration basis your contract, and that would apply. But there's nothing specifically that you would need to draft in your contract. Your contract will not change for drafting any clause on doctrine of frustration. That is the principle of.
Yeah, and it would be like the substantive law doesn't change whether you do arbitration or anything. If you go for arbitration outside India and the law of law of the contract is some other law, then we have to see under that law whether if there's a
Sure.
Indian Contract Act stands, right?
Yes. The next question I can read is somebody wanted the government circular pertaining to loan payments. That's the one which has been.
Parveen, I just wanted to ask you one question though, like on the back of the previous one, like what if there's no force majeure clause? Like, normally people write a force majeure clause. Many times you don't have force majeure clause in the contract in India. So when that does not happen, like somebody has not put a force majeure clause, can they claim force majeure outside that through some common law remedy, etc.? So if you can explain.
That really depends on the contract, because you have to read it in conjunction with the other obligations that you have taken on. There would be milestones, there would be time-bound obligations. All of that needs to be read together to, if you have not even specified a force majeure clause. You'll also have to look into what is the consequences of you not performing obligations within the time periods that are specified in absence of force majeure clause, and what is the procedure that is recommended then, because it would be an event of default and the consequences on either party for that default. Then accordingly it would be whether force majeure would really be applicable, because you've not even specified for it, and it's a subject matter of dispute then.
Great. So you wanted to address one question about some government circulars.
Yes, somebody was seeking the RBI circular regarding the loan payments, which has been released today. I could send that across to Ramanuj, and we can.
Sure. We'll get it circulated in all our groups. No problem. Even I have access to it. I'll get it circulated.
Yes. So all the circulars are easily available, and if there's any specific requirement, you can put it on the chat, and we'd be happy to share that across to the ones which are relevant for you.
Hey, Ramanuj, I have a small query regarding the earlier question. According to me, I guess it should be force majeure here, and doctrine of frustration might not apply, because it's not a kind of a supervening impossibility, but it is an act of God, which I suppose would be covered squarely under force majeure. What is your view on it, and perhaps Parveen's view?
Sure.
So, yeah.
completely agree. Doctrine of frustration is on impossibility of contract, and it really depends when you read it with the contract as to what was the obligation which was to be performed, and whether you'll be in a position to really resume the service on the obligation after the force majeure period is over, or the event itself of the current circumstance that we are in is of such a magnitude that it leads to an impossibility really from the contract, irrespective of the situation, being tided over.
Okay. And also we have to keep in mind, I think that given the scenario that what is going on, it would be very hard for, if somebody claims doctrine of frustration, even if you can come up with a technical argument as to why it does not apply to the situation, it will be very hard for courts not to, allow doctrine of frustration in these cases where it has been, such a worldwide catastrophe, and, everybody has suffered so much. I courts will be willing to grant relief of doctrine of frustration if somebody seeks it. And I mean, of course, it has to be seen how it actually plays out. But if you see the way Indian government, Indian courts have been interpreting contract law, they have always taken public policy and then the situation at large into account rather than going by strict technicalities also. So that's also to be kept in mind. Mahesh Dhanawat has been raising your hand, so should I unmute you? Do you want to speak, Mahesh?
Yeah. Actually, I see that this has brought in great opportunity for lawyers in future. So how do corporate look after hiring lawyers after the epidemic comes to peace?
Okay.
Hello?
Yeah.
So if I can understand the correct question correctly, it's how will independent lawyers be treated post the situation? Is that the question?
Yeah,
I think he's saying, can I say for a moment, just for in interest of time, Mahesh, I think you are saying that there is a lot of work for lawyers, but how can independent lawyers get involved with corporate clients and get work around this kind of renegotiation and advisory, right? Right. Okay.
Right, sir.
Yes, that's really purely dependent on your professional relations with the corporate itself, whether it's a law firm or it's an individual. I don't think that's the case. Corporates really select people to work with basis their expertise and what they really bring to the table. So I don't think there would be a distinction on that. I have personally dealt with law firms and individual lawyers also, and it's only been a matter of their reputation and their credibility and their absolute technical expertise.
So I will try to just quickly add my 2 cents here, like what I have seen other lawyers doing, some of our students doing. So remember that this is a time to have a lot of empathy. So it's not about only going to clients and asking for more and more work, but you have to be sympathetic to their situation. Many of them are in great uncertainty. Others are under a lot of pressure. So we must, keep that in mind and reach out to them with a lot of empathy and try to help. So, for example, it's a great idea if you reach out to your existing clients and ask them that, this is the law and this is what's happening. These are the circulars. These are the law of contract that I can quickly educate you and see if there are certain ways in which I can help you. Like I know one lawyer who reached out to several of his clients and said, I might be able to help you with renegotiating your rent contracts. Just share the contract with me and I'll take a look at it, whether it has a force majeure clause, and then I'll come up with a strategy. And by the way, he didn't ask for money. He didn't say, this is either pro bono or low bono at the moment. And once you start doing this, of course, in future, you get to build a better relationship. Sometimes there may be opportunities for paid work, but I think this is a great time to reach out to people and help them out. And eventually, like Parveen was saying, you get to have a good relationship, establish your credibility, establish your good work with them. And if they benefit, surely there would be, if the businesses are standing and they're doing well, eventually you can expect good work coming your way from them. And definitely, if there are litigations arising out of these contracts in the future, and you have been helping with them and working with them on such matters, there are good chances that many of them will come to you. And very interestingly, there are so many startups, so many SMEs, so many companies which do not have any in-house counsels. They completely rely on outside advice, and right now they are very clueless as to what could all this mean. They are not very clear, and they need good advice, good counseling. So definitely, I hope that many of you will reach out to your clients and offer to help them out, explain to them what the situation is and how they can recalibrate their strategies. And definitely, they need this advice at this time, right? So I think that would be a good strategy rather than looking at this as okay, immediately how can I get 5 clients to pay me XYZ money, right? So a little bit of long-term thinking here would really help. So what do you think, Parveen, do you think this makes sense overall?
Yes, absolutely. It really depends. It is an interesting time. Yes, a lot of work for lawyers, whether in-house or with law firms or even independent counsels after the entire situation. Even during the situation, there's a lot of interpretation and issues. And there's one specific question on real estate sector and how it's really been impacted. Now, this is really interesting because this sector is highly just been recently regulated with RERA. A lot of projects have given timelines by which they will deliver. Yes, this has been classified as a force majeure event, and companies should be entitled to extensions, but they will really have to justify the reasons for extension, which will not just be the lockdown period. There is going to require time to remobilize the site because the workers will need to come back to the site. At every quarter, you're required to submit the architect certificate, CA certificate, and the engineer certificate. Since the financials will be reworked, all these certificates do get impacted. Also, a lot of agreements are required to be registered once you make the payment beyond 10%. Given that government offices have slowed down, only Pune has, I think, passed a circular where you can do registrations online. I still have to see whether this applies to agreements for immovable property, because it currently has been only for leave and license agreements across that you could do it online. That's going to be a challenge. Also, booking forms agreements are required to be physically executed because it's a transaction in immobile property. Digital signatures were not being implemented and not accepted for the longest period, and all real estate developers had to physically execute agreements. But given the present situation, because the company offices are closed and the customer cannot travel to the site to even execute the agreement or register the agreement, there's going to be a cash flow issue that you cannot collect above 10% till you don't do the agreement. And obviously companies are going to look at lobbying with the governments to see how that condition in the act is going to be relaxed given the present situation, so that the company is able to at least fund the amounts for the milestones that it has managed to complete pending a registration of the agreements. The entire construction cycle itself will need to be revisited given the present situation once there's more clarity, to see whether there's any extension of time periods which will be required. Accordingly, a lot of communication with the customers is going to be the key during this period, so that there's absolute transparency, the trust is retained, so that the customers know that the corporates are taking an extension only due to these genuine reasons, and the houses that have been promised would be delivered once they're able to tide over the issues, not only because of the lockdown, but it's going to require the entire remobilization of a site. There are several suppliers. Real estate is the second largest employer in India, and there are a lot of parts that have to contribute to a construction cycle to be able to complete the development. So yes, it's already in a very stressed situation. The state has been in a very stressed situation since last year. Even in the budget, we do not see many reforms for this sector. And now given this situation, it's going to be even more badly hit. Probably the government may look at it, but it's yet to be seen.
One area that has been bothering a lot of people is that how does insurance look like in this whole situation? Because normally people, when have a disaster, they look at getting insurance payouts. But now, given the entire industry, everybody is hit, so everybody will be claiming insurance. And how viable would insurance payouts will be also, or insurance companies would have be under stress as well. So, any thoughts and any ideas about that? Because when people have significant business risks of this kind, usually they cover it by insurances, professional liability insurances. Even like many times when you're doing a project, say for a government, etc., you provide bank guarantees or you have some kind of insurances. So how is that going to impact?
Yes, so insurance companies, yes, would be revisiting, given that there would be payouts. Now it's yet to be seen whether there'll be an impact on the premiums that are payable. There are certain relaxations, I believe, on the timelines for payment of the insurance premiums. Group medical insurance itself will be impacted, whether group or individual medical insurance. That would be deeply impacted. A lot of issues relating to risks due to being in the health sector, the people who are providing services in the health sector, how their premiums and what other covers that they'll be exposed to will be all impacted. So that's yet to be seen.
If you can tell us a little bit about how you see in-house counsels are playing a very important role right now, more than outside advisors, from what I understand, because they understand their companies' businesses much more closely, so they know the areas of risks, and a lot of things are also confidential right now, so they are not necessarily going a lot outside. So I understand that in-house counsels, although they're working from home, are super busy. Do you think this situation will strengthen the position of in-house counsels in the legal industry? Because already we have seen a trend over the last few years, I would say almost a decade, where in-house counsel as a position has become more and more important for companies. And there was a time people said that in-house counsels are mere conduits between the business and outside firms. From there, in-house counsels have already gotten into a driving seat, very much determining what services they want, how they want to drive it, doing more and more work in-house rather than going outside, building bigger teams inside companies. So do you think that somehow this in-house counsel positions will be even more in vogue and more companies will set up bigger in-house counsel teams? Is that a possible fallout of what happened with COVID?
Sure. Yes, I do believe I've been in practice for the last 19 years, and what the role of an in-house counsel was perceived to be was more of a prelude to retirement setup and to how it is really, now. It's dramatically changed. What's really, really important is that in-house counsel is very close to business. This impacts their understanding to the business issues. They understand the issues that the teams are facing from different departments. Their turnaround time can be very high, because at times going to a law firm, briefing them, the drafts coming, then the business teams looking at, the speed is of the greatest concern here. So I wouldn't say law firms don't add value. They add tremendous value, and there'll be a lot of issues that you still have to go for a lot of expert advice. But when you're looking at daily business issues, you're looking at turning out a lot of communication, a lot of advisory communication. It could be also, all of that requires legal inputs constantly, and therefore the in-house legal team plays a very strategic role along with the business team, especially in these times.
So you foresee more the role of, there may be more jobs in the in-house counsel roles, and there may be more companies still creating bigger in-house teams.
Yes, but I definitely believe so, and this definitely would really depend from corporate to corporate due to the size of the business. It needs to also make financial sense to the corporate to hire an in-house counsel. If they don't have much legal work, then they will not, and it's easier and cheaper to probably outsource. But when you have a mid-sized corporate or a larger corporate which has multi departments, it has multiple kinds of legal issues. There could be multiple legislations that need to be looked into. Then yes, an in-house counsel and an in-house team, whether small or large, does make a lot of sense. And I would foresee a lot of growth in that area also.
Great. So I have got a lot of questions from many different lawyers in the past few days. They are really scared also. Many people are quite scared and concerned. A lot more than scared. Right now, it's not that it's scared really the wrong term, but they are very concerned about how things are going to play out. There is a fear that there may be a recession coming. Today we read news of PwC announcing a lot of they withheld all of their increments and bonuses and salary increases, and in their management team there's a pay cut, and people have a lot of lawyers and even other consultants are quite concerned about how things are going to play out for them. And in that circumstances, they want to know that how should they proceed and where would the next opportunities arise in the legal industry. So you being in I'm not specifically talking about your company, but generally in the legal in-house counsel role, having worked with many different companies, where do you think what do you think would be a logical step for lawyers who are independent lawyers or running small law firms or small practices? Where can they focus? Many people have this problem that they were working in the courts and they're not sure when the courts are going to open again, and so even for them it has been a very trying time for many lawyers, and they are worried even if they're not immediately at risk, but they have a concern as to how things are going to play out in the long run. So if you can give some direction, some ideas as to like where they can focus their energy and efforts.
This honestly is a very difficult question because we are in a situation of lockdown. It is a moment of status quo for everybody, and therefore any kind of change needs to be really looked at in terms of which sector you're really looking at, whether you want to continue still as an in-house counsel, or you're going to look at independent practice. It's very, very person dependent, because if you're in courts and practicing as an in-house counsel, it has gone into a lot of e-filing. It is only urgent matters which are being taken up, and therefore clients would be coming to you dependent on what their issues are basis your existing relations. So whether you're looking at transitioning from an independent counsel into an in-house role really depends whether there's any opportunity available given the current market scenario itself. So that's a very difficult question to answer and give a straight response as to what would be the best way forward, because it's really going to depend from individual to individual. I could only say you got to be very alert and do what you think is best for you. Adapt very easily. Look at speed and agility in the service that you're providing. Look at using technology in a lot of ways of doing it, and be very current in the legal situation. There are circulars being passed every day. It's very important to understand how that is going to pan out and have your own kind of mapping as to where the future is headed.
Okay, so if you can, I understand it's a really difficult question to answer by any of these things. What should lawyers do if given difficult situations? But if you can think of any opportunities, there are also many opportunities existed in the economy, which we guess would again reopen once lockdown is lifted, where there are a lot of underserved or unserved markets where lawyers were not, like there were not enough service capacity, or people were not focusing on those areas enough, or if we can foresee some new areas of work which will increase. So one thing we have heard repeatedly, for example, is that China was the manufacturer of the entire world, and now all MNCs are reconsidering their China strategy, because concentrating the entire supply chain in China, now they understand, puts them at a great risk. So they want to diversify and deleverage, and they also want to have, like, that way India might become a very interesting place where there may be there's a local market, and it's possible to build a supply chain. Cost of labor is not that high. So there is a possibility that we would see foreign investment in manufacturing sector once things get a little normalized. So maybe people could start reskilling or upskilling themselves in those directions. So in that direction, if you can think of any particular strategy that some lawyers could consider, at least it would give them a some sense of direction.
Sure. I think it's just about watching where each of the sectors are headed, where manufacturing is going to, take place. Globalization itself is changing. There are a lot of articles on how it's going to move towards localization. And the opportunities could be looked at from that point of view to see where one can add value. As a lawyer, you could see whether you're talking on renegotiating or restructuring businesses. That's one area of opportunity. Or it could be a lot of dispute resolution issues if you're on the litigation side, and see where that really is taking place, and leverage the opportunity accordingly.
Great. I see Rishi Rati has raised his hand for a long time. So Rishi, can you please speak up if you have a question? Yes, Rishi.
Yeah, my question is, we have different vendors. For example, we have canteen vendors, we have bus vendors. They are not able to perform their part of contract because of lockdown. So are we liable to pay? Are we liable to perform our part and we pay?
Sure. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please continue.
Okay. I think what's really important is to first step back and understand this is a time for empathy. It's very important that we understand and empathize with people who are less fortunate than us before we get into legal provisions of contracts. Yes, all of us are financially impacted. If you need a legal response, then this really depends on the terms of your contract again. But whether you want to marry a legal and an ethical response together, and then provide some kind of rational advice to your company or to your client, you can do that too, to probably help the people who are in a very inconvenienced position that they did not foresee at this point of time.
Okay, so there's another question from Swati Agarwal. She shared it privately with me. I have a question regarding what can be done if the vendors of our clients stop payments in the wake of financial crunch due to COVID-19. So it's a similar question about vendors stopping payments. Like, what can we do if they are not paying?
Yes, if they're not performing the terms of the contract, just go back and see what is your options, whether it constitutes an event of default, leads it into a termination, and consequences of termination, whether you will be able to claw back the advances that you have given to them and they have not provided you the goods or the services. Then you could probably send them notices to claim that back. All of it needs to be looked at, but read in terms of the force majeure clause, if any, in your contract. Because it shouldn't be that you send out such a communication and they respond back stating that they're entitled to not perform the services because of certain clauses in the agreement. So I would advise you to read the contract in toto and then analyze that and see what are the implications and what remedy and relief you really have.
I will quickly add something here. It's very clear right now that it's the time. It's like a high time that you show your business canny apart from your legal acumen. So definitely, after you look at every law and understand the exact legal position, you should also think of the business side of it, because ultimately, like businesses, for many businesses right now, it's a question of survival. And so you have to first think that if it is your business, like let's assume it's your business for a moment, right? So you have to think that, okay, what are exactly the risks, Do I have the cash to survive this period? How do I survive through this period? And right now, everything is negotiable. Okay, it is a situation where you call people and tell them that I have to do this, otherwise, like, I can't survive. So do you want me to pay you later, or you get nothing? Literally, it's like that in most cases. A great way to do this is to call up, say somebody owes you money. It's a great thing to call them up and say that I'm going to give you a 20%, 30% discount if you pay me before the year ends, right? For a lot of companies right now who have cash in their book, they also need to book expenses, by the way. So the horizon is actually shifting, right? So you have to, like, in the next few days, you have an opportunity to call up people and get some money at a discount. So maybe you are losing 20%, but it could be the difference between your company surviving or not. So in that case, you need to take those business calls and discuss that with the entrepreneurs, or with the management, or with whoever you work, right? The business side of people. So that's very important, and doing that can make a great difference. This is a great time to renegotiate your contract. So if you have a certain, say a supply contract, and you can't supply, high time you renegotiate that. Even the other side may be very willing to renegotiate right now, because they know you're not going to deliver. They cannot hold it against you in most cases, because nobody else is delivering either. So it's a great time to negotiate and figure this out. So you might get into a clause that when this is, we will deliver it after, let's say, a lockdown is lifted or some knowledge happens. So right now, if you get it in writing, it kind of protects you later from future litigation or future claims, and it might even provide some basis of future negotiations, right? But some sort of understanding you can try reaching with people, because this is a time when you can actually negotiate things, right? Everybody knows. The other side of difficulty is that it's hard to negotiate because you don't even know the facts as to how things will play out in the future. So you don't know that whether on 15th of April the lockdown will be lifted or it will be extended even further. Nobody knows that. Nobody knows what's going to happen in Europe. Nobody knows what's going to happen in China. With, like, it's such a uncertain situation that negotiation is also hard. But so when you renegotiate, you might want to keep those things a little loose so that you have chances to improvise or negotiate later on again. So these are a few things I can think of. Another thing is that if you have cash, this is a great time to approach people and tell them that I want a discount, but I'll pay you cash right now. So there are businesses which have cash, right? So great time to see if you can pay for your future liabilities that you know are certainly going to arise, and get a great discount on it, right? And people might be willing to give you that. And your businessman friend or your clients may not have thought of that. Say if you're in-house counsel, your business may not be thinking of all of these things right now, but you can propose it to them, because you have to give business solutions rather than just hardcore legal knowledge. They will appreciate it much more than your contract law and frustration and anticipatory breach of contract, etc. Right? So this is my 2 cents. Parveen, what would you say?
Yes, in fact, I'd say I'll summarize that and say that there are 3 things that you have to look at as a business now. One is the depth of the disruption to your business. The second is the length of the disruption that you will expect the business to go through. And lastly, the shape of your recovery. How are you going to recover from all of this? And what is your business plan to be able to stay afloat and sustain yourself? Now, this would require a lot of soft measures as well as hard measures, and a lot of business decisions to be taken. In light of it, there are a lot of news on certain corporates and consultancy firms taking immediate action, whether in relation to salaries, etc. Like I said, it's all really dependent on the financial health of the corporate to be able to sustain any kind of actions that it has been taking. There's no right or wrong. You don't want a situation where after the entire lockdown situation, a lot of corporates going into insolvency with the recently enacted IBC code. We'll all end up there. So obviously, when a certain management is brainstorming and looking at their 5 Rs, they will have to see how they're going to manage their cash flow situation in the long term.
Exactly. So we have one question from Anand, and if we have few more minutes of time, can we wrap up a few more questions, or we are like over with our time, if it's okay?
Well, I mean, it's okay. If the people want to clarify it, since we're all together, we're happy to.
Great, sure. So Anand has a question. Anand, you want to ask it?
Yeah, Ramanuj. Hi, am I audible?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so my question, we have already discussed about force majeure in detail. But imagine a scenario where I am a service recipient and the service is entirely online. So in that scenario, can I expressly exclude COVID-19 from the ambit of force majeure? The services here are entirely online and it's not anything physical delivery of any goods. It's entirely online. So can I, in that force majeure clause, exclude COVID-19 expressly from the ambit of force majeure?
Yes. So I'd answer it in two ways. One is you would have to specify what your force majeure is, and if you're saying any act of God is a force majeure, then of course, COVID is going to be excluded. But if you're going to write act of God excluding COVID situation, and there is an express understanding between the two parties that this situation is not impacted and you have adequate drafting to that effect, yes, with a rationale as to why it is not applicable.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
But if I was negotiating that and you are a service provider and say you are all online, why it doesn't happen? I would say that, okay, I am an online business, but my people, for example, may be working from home. Maybe there's an internet disruption. Who knows what will happen, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes getting food. So if tomorrow there's no internet there, how can I ensure service delivery? So I would probably not want to take on such a risk burden saying that, okay, we are an online service, so I'm giving you a blanket, this thing that, it's very hard. Services has to resume, but for a few days there were places in India where essential services were not available, and definitely nothing that we can, obviously the other side is probably going to object to that.
Fair enough. But we are still
negotiating. Nothing is 100% on. Nothing is 100% online.
Yeah. Sure. What you look at is what are the exclusions that you want to provide to it, because if the staff, God forbid, does contract it, then the ability to provide service, while your business model may be facilitating, but if its backend requires people to do it, or if there are certain...
There will be data centers, there will be something else. Data centers has to be kept running, you never know.
Okay.
So great. So there is one question that repeatedly has been asked, and I think it's a very important question. Can we ask employees to voluntarily give up for a few months' salary or take 50% cut, etc.? Like basically, a lot of people are worried about being able to pay their employees given the scenario, and how can that be handled? Obviously, legally, logically, ethically. Any suggestions?
Yes, this is a difficult one, given that, so let's classify the employees. There are a lot of circulars which definitely address the issue about daily wage workers and the building construction workers. Those circulars do exist. Employees, different companies have taken different positions given their financial on what is going to be possible. Certain consultancy firms have even made public announcements relating to the bonuses and salary hikes and how they're going to be treating that. If there is any kind of mutual understanding, and this again comes back to the leadership of the management, where you take into confidence the employees, they understand the financial health of the company, they're looking at long-term being associated with the corporate and are willing to let go of a certain pay package, then that is a mutual agreement which could then be documented. You could look at alternatively, if you're not able to arrive at a mutual agreement, then it comes back to appointment letters, terms and conditions that you have with the employees, and whether you want to look at a unilateral, pay cut, etc. It really depends on your appointment terms.
Yes, and I think there's the situation is that everybody knows that moving to another company right now is quite hard, etc. Like the way we are scared that we will lose our best employees or will not be able to pay them. What are you going to do? Even they are equally scared. And there are industries like, for example, restaurant industry. There everything is shut, right? Even in other industries, hotels, they're facing the same kind of problem. So it's not like employees are also keenly aware of the fact that it is not entirely the obligation of the employer. I mean, of course, it is obligation maybe legally to pay them, but whether they'll be able to retain their job. So if the company goes down, their job goes, I mean, sure, like you can get a few months retrenchment payment maybe, but that's not exactly what people are looking for. They're looking for stability. They're looking for their companies to survive. So it's pretty much the employment market is such right now that there is no scope for people to particularly be move out and do other things really. So everybody wants to save their company, and I think that is the approach. A collaborative approach has to be taken, and transparent also. I think great transparency is required from the side of the employers, because if they don't present the situation in a transparent way, you cannot really build trust, cannot expect cooperation. So I think that would be critical. And of course, existing relationships with the employees would matter a lot. Like what was the relationship before COVID? So that's it. I think we have answered most of the question. Any urgent pressing question, please?
Add to that, Ramanuj, that
please.
going to be relevant because we're currently talking of employees. We really need to see whether these are classified as workmen under the Industrial Dispute Act, and whether we have to entirely follow the procedure under the Industrial Disputes Act relating to retrenchment, etc. And the Labour Commissioner approvals, the process which applies. What we have discussed is a very limited discussion related to employees who are not impacted by Industrial Dispute Act or any other local legislation.
Sure, yeah. Things are much more complicated if you are working in a factory or manufacturing. Absolutely. So, okay. Can you please repeat those 5 hours?
The credit goes to Mackenzie for these 5 hours, but I will repeat it and summarize it again at the end of this lovely session. Thank you all for being there. The 5 hours are firstly, resolve. We have to address the immediate challenges. The second is resilience, where you identify the key risks, the near-term cash management issues. It's recommended to conduct stress testing of financials and build a resilience dashboard. The third R is return, where you plan how the business is going to scale back once you return from this current situation of lockdown. The fourth R is reimagination, where what is the next normal, how business will now be conducted. A lot of it is expected to be digital, with a lot of use of technology, with increased trust and transparency with work from home modules. And the last R is reform. There will be a lot of regulatory change, and we will really need to, as lawyers, in-house counsels, independent counsels, really monitor that very closely, analyze the impact, and advise our clients accordingly.
Great. Thank you so much, Parveen. It was really wonderful. You have shared a very good perspective, and you have, I think I personally got a lot of clarity about, how corporate India is handling this and how companies can possibly handle this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It has been
Thank you for sharing your time with all of us. And I would request everybody who attended the session to please share a feedback. You can either share it right away in the group so that Parveen can also be privy to it, or you can share in the WhatsApp group later on. Okay, great. 10 on 10. Everybody is giving a 10. Do share. Yes, anything that you can suggest that we can improve apart from the birds chirping in my background, which I will work on. Anything else, definitely please let us know. That would be wonderful.
And lastly, I think those who wanted specific government circulars, if you could message back to Ramanuj, we would make sure that those are sent across to you.
Yeah, and is there a way we can get that McKinsey report on 5 hours? Because a lot of people requesting it should be written down and sent to them. So
So I'll send that across to you, and then you can send it across.
Great. So we'll circulate that report also in your group so that you have access to the whole thing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. Everybody, thank you, Parveen. Thank you for joining. Take care. Have a great day.